नहीं था wasn't legal. That's why we don't have a certificate in distance. ऐसा हमारे क्लास में ऐसा ये प्रैक्टिकल होता है ऐसे बैठते हैं सिर्फ यहाँ पे ऐसा नहीं होता ना चेस कभी भी यहाँ अच्छा पढ़ाई नहीं करते right good afternoon American Revolution political questions भी आता है like regarding the course of events and as well as questions regarding its influence on the rest of the world, especially French Revolution and its revolution and especially on itself as well, like for drafting of the Constitution, Declaration of Rights, and as well as its impact on civil war. So, have you gone through the PYQs? What's research? कहाँ? हाँ? अच्छा प्रैक्टिस चल रहा है कहाँ तक आया प्रैक्टिस कहाँ तक आया मतलब हो गया एक बार एक दो बार हो गया कंप्लीट ही नहीं हुआ एक बार में नहीं हुआ ऐसा क्यों See 2018 previous year question. Critical exam, the American War of Independence transformed Europe as well as America. So just now I have mentioned that it will ask you the impact of American Revolution on America and rest of the world. So same question it was asked 2018. What was the question? American War of Independence transformed Europe as well as America. So it's like nothing but the impact of American War of Independence. Okay. Similarly, actually, most of the questions will come from French Revolution actually, rather than another question, 2014. American Revolution seems to have come with remarkable suddenness. A roster of talented leaders emerged during 1763 to 1775 to make it happen. American Revolution seemed to have come with remarkable suddenness. That means it's a sudden moment. So that's why we have discussed like particularly from 1763 onwards. So we discussed 1763 se pehle and 1763 and 1763 after. So that means you have to discuss from events from 1763, especially the King's Proclamation. Okay. And a roster of talented leaders emerged during. Talented leaders. Who? Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock, Samuel Adams, John Dickinson. So these are the various. Later on, George Washington, right? That's one more question. American Revolution was essentially an economic conflict between American capitalism and British mercantilism. So this is what we have discussed, that the most of the laws which are of economic interest to promote the interest of, to promote mercantilist interest of whom? British. So that actually affected whose economy? America. So that was a conflict between American capitalism and British mercantilism. So that is also, so questions are like this. Okay. How far it is correct to say that every feature of American Constitution was ultimately of English origin? So talking about American constitutional features, explaining the features with their relation to English origin. No taxation without representation. Comments. That was the slogan of American Revolution. American War of Independence deprived Great Britain of one empire, but it strengthened the foundations of another. That is, it is a decline of British Empire and rise of America. American War of Independence transformed European as well as America. Same question I just read around 2 minutes ago, right? Which was 2018 question. The same question from 1990. American War of Independence transformed Europe as well as. So in history, optional questions will be repeated. Okay. So PVQs you need to go through. हाँ ले सकते, उससे भी ले सकते हैं, या एक बुक है so उसका, but उस बुक में answers will be very short and crisp actually, so it will not be proper analytical way, but for normal understanding, at least for approach, you can take one book. I will search that book as well. Okay. So today we'll see (1789). So what is this French Revolution? What is this French Revolution? Huh? When it occurred? From 1789 onwards. So what is this French Revolution? See, this French Revolution was a social and political movement that started in France in 1789, right? So the reasons, in fact, it had a great impact on France and rest of the world, especially France and rest of the Europe and rest of the world. So including India also, we also have taken very many idols of French Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity, right? So talking about this French Revolution, so especially what is its impact? It ended monarchy and promoted constitution and also resulted in declaration of rights. So especially rights of all All in the sense, actually, there were some limitations as well. So, especially Declaration of Rights of Man, actually. So, which we already discussed in the earlier classes, that Enlightenment has some of its limitations, that they ignored the rights of women. Okay. So, but basically, we can say they ended these monarchies and established republic and democracy. They ended republic and democracy. So, why this revolution occurred in France only? So, we are talking that this French Revolution occurred in France. So, why it occurred? So, this is the major revolution that occurred in Europe. So, even though before French Revolution, we have American Revolution, but American Revolution conditions, the reasons for American Revolution and the course of revolution was very much different from French Revolution, right? It's not about what is the difference between American Revolution and French Revolution. American Revolution is actually more like a result of promotion of British mercantilist interest on American colonies. Whereas a French Revolution is not just economical, it has both social, economical, and political causes, actually, right? So, it is an upheaval which had social, economic, political factors. Social, economic, and political factors. So, the basic existing conditions, actually proved to be favorable for eruption of a revolution. So, the basic conditions, social conditions, economic conditions, and political conditions in France actually provided favorable condition or favorable environment for eruption of a revolution that resulted in the form of French Revolution in 1789, right? So, let us see what are those conditions. Okay. See, basically, talking about France, first of all, you should understand the nature of France, right? So, talking about this France, so France was under absolute monarchy, that is the Bourbon monarchy. So, we are talking about here Louis XIV, Louis XV, and Louis XVI. So, especially revolution occurred during the time of Louis XVI, right? So, French was under absolute monarchy. French was under feudalism, feudal polity. So, where the society was dominated by aristocracy or the nobility, right? So, where the society privileged, divided into privileged and unprivileged classes, privileged and unprivileged classes. So, where privileged classes were the clergy and nobility, whereas unprivileged class was common people, right? And the prevalence of especially tax burden was on privileged or unprivileged? Unprivileged. So tax burden was on unprivileged, right? Domination of church, right? And as well as economic conditions prevalent in France from 1760s to 1780s. So the basic economic conditions that are prevalent, and also another is rise of middle class. So in America also we have seen this rise of middle class. So in French also we have seen this rise of middle class, who were the intelligent class who started questioning the evils of absolute monarchies, right? So this is the basic setup of France. Basic setup of, so French was under absolute monarchy, which is under Bourbon monarchy. So particularly we are mentioning about Louis 14, 15 and 16. So society was under feudal polity, where it was dominated by aristocracy. So where the society was divided into privileged class and unprivileged class. Privileged class was the clergy and nobility. Unprivileged was the common people. So especially the tax burden was on unprivileged classes. So economic conditions prevalent that also provided favorable conditions, and as well as the role of middle class, right? So let us see the causes for French Revolution. Causes for French Revolution. So basically, first and foremost, evils of absolute monarchy. So evils of absolute monarchy means, what does that mean? No rights for common people. Okay. See, the government was highly centralized. Highly centralized means all functions of government were concentrated in the hands of king, right? Especially here, if we talk about the rulers, whether Louis 15 or Louis 16, these are weak and incompetent. Weak and incompetent. So the government was corrupt, arbitrary, right? And aristocracy was uncontrolled, right? So aristocracy uncontrolled means who enjoyed the feudal privileges, right? And in fact, we can say uh, to some extent the rule was also tyrannical in nature, where any voice, anyone who rose his voice were arrested and imprisoned. So that is the evils of absolute monarchy. So what are those evils? The government was highly centralized, and all the functions of government was concentrated in the hands of ruler, and especially rulers like Louis XV and Louis XVI were incompetent. The administration was corrupt, and decisions were arbitrary in nature, and the aristocracy uncontrolled. That means uncontrolled under king. So aristocracy was enjoying privileges under the king, right? So here, so another reason is Louis XVI. See, Louis XVI ascended the throne in 1774. See, especially here, the French conditions started to deteriorate, especially from 1760s. So why 1760s? Here again, I'm referring to 1763. What is 1763? That's okay, but end of 7-year war. So from 56 to 1763, it was a period of 7-year war. So this 7-year war had devastating effect on the economy of both England and France. So especially France. So the French economy started to cripple from this 7 years war, and especially at that time, Louis XVI, Louis XV, and Louis XVI here we're referring to, failed to recover that economy. And at the same time, these feudal lords, especially aristocracy, continue to enjoy privileges. So they stopped any kind of reforms tried to be introduced by the king, right? So that's why the failure of Louis XVI actually provided the favorable conditions for French Revolution, right? So let us see them. So Louis XVI became the ruler, the French monarch in 1774. So here we're not only Louis XV or 16, we can talk about both Louis XV and Louis XVI. So especially he failed to bring economic reforms, right? So for suppose though economic revision was started under ministers like initially Turgot and later Necker, but under the pressure of the noble class, these reforms were not implemented. And in fact, these two were later removed as well, right? Because of the weak character of Louis XVI. So weak character in the sense he failed to control aristocracy, right? So that is another factor. Another factor is social conditions. So what are the social conditions? Social conditions in France. See, coming to the France, most of the population was dependent. But however, in the past few years, the harvest was very poor. So in the past few years, the harvest was very poor. That means what kind of conditions? The France was facing famine conditions. So in this famine conditions, so hunger became or we can say hunger became a daily problem. People are suffering from extreme poverty. The society was under social and economic. The social and economic inequalities were very high. The social and economic inequalities were very high. And especially labor became unemployed, right? And on top of that, taxation burden was on these common people. The tax burden was on these common people. So especially agriculture failed. So agriculture dependent labor becomes unemployed. So when unemployment increases, income inequality increases, poverty becomes a common problem, right? So that's the point, right? So, and talking about the French society, so the society was divided into three classes called three estates. So first estate was the clergy. The second estate was nobility. Third estate was commoners. Commoners includes peasants, merchants, artisans, laborers, right? Traders. So the wealthy and intelligent class among these commoners were the wealthy and intelligent class among these commoners were middle class. So that's the class who led these commoners to raise their voice against the privileges enjoyed by first and second estate, right? See, this is the privileged classes, and this is the unprivileged class, right? So that's why. So these are exempted from taxes. Tax burden is on, or we can say, they bore the tax burden, right? So that is another factor, the basic existing social conditions, right? Another cause was influence of Enlightenment ideas. Enlightenment ideas. So, Enlightenment ideas of 17th and 18th century of Europe have greatly influenced French Revolution, right? So, especially the ideas like liberty, equality, fraternity became the basic ideals of what? Ideals of French Revolution, right? So, ideas of Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau have greatly influenced freedom of rights, social and economic equality, and promoting the ideas of republic and democracy, right? So these ideas have brought a great change in the intellectual change in the minds of people. So especially they wanted to overthrow the existing older regime and they wanted to replace it with a new regime, right? So especially that's why taking the cue from these ideas. So the French Revolution have developed new ideas like liberty, equality, and fraternity, promoting republic, promoting freedom, promoting democracy, and overthrowing the existing older regime like absolute monarchy and replacing it with republic, right? So that is another factor. So another factor is financial crisis and debt crisis in France. So what is this financial or debt crisis in France? See, especially as I mentioned already, particularly in 1770s and 80s, France was undergoing in a financial crisis. So because of various reasons, right? What are those? 7 Years War. So French was going through financial crisis because of 7 Years War and agricultural failure, that is poor harvest and failure of economic reforms under Louis XVI, right? So that is another reason. So another factor was taxation. Another factor was taxation. So as I already mentioned, so regarding this taxation, who are the taxpayers and who are the non-taxpayers? Privileged class were the non-taxpayers. The tax burden is on common. So this called as tax oppressiveness. Tax oppressiveness, that is tax burden is on the unprivileged classes. Okay, so unprivileged classes means especially here the government tried to reform the existing taxes and introduced any form of new taxes will put more burden on whom? The unprivileged classes. So obviously, will they allow the government to impose new taxes? No, right? So another is failure of economic reforms, as I mentioned earlier also. So these economic reforms, who tried to introduce economic reforms? See, because the main reason is because of incapability of both Louis XV and Louis XVI. Louis XV's incapabilities, especially as I already mentioned that several ministers like Turgot and Necker tried to bring reforms, but these reforms were not implemented by especially these reforms in taxes. So what are the reforms? Actually, initially Turgot and later Necker have proposed that to reform existing taxes and reduce unnecessary expenditures. Means obviously this will impact whom? Aristocracy. So will aristocracy encourage these tax reforms? No. So they started to put pressure on Louis XVI. So Louis XVI did not implement these tax reforms. So he removed Turgot and Necker from the finance ministry, right? So that is that led to failure of economic reforms. Another reason is, most importantly, the food scarcity. So as I already mentioned, the French was going through a famine. So series of crop failures led to, so French facing series of crop failure. So that resulted in famine conditions. So in famine conditions, what will happen? This resulted in poverty of peasants and agricultural laborers, right? And that resulted in starvation, deaths. That resulted in starvation, deaths. So, and most importantly, it also resulted in inflation as well, right? And it also resulted in bread rights. That means people are fighting for bread. Just a piece of bread, getting a piece of bread itself become a huge problem, right? So people are, so obviously this in fact created a situation called great fear. So great fear among the minds of people. So where people, a sentiment have started in the minds of people that resulted in revolution. Right? So these are the conditions for French Revolution, right? So what are the conditions? What are the causes? Evils of absolute monarchy and weak and incompetency of Louis XVI and existing social conditions and So what is those existing social conditions? Like the society was divided into three classes, that is first estate, second estate, and third estate. So where first estate and second estate enjoyed privileges, third estate was the unprivileged class who bore the tax burden. Similarly, influence of Enlightenment ideas, financial crisis and debt crisis in France, taxation policy or taxation reforms, and failure of economic reforms, and food scarcity resulted in inflation, starvation deaths, bread riots, and great fear, right? So these are the causes for French Revolution. Okay. So in these conditions, France faced a serious revolution. It's called French Revolution. So now let us say the course of French Revolution. See, course of French Revolution, you can divide it into different stages actually. National Assembly. So 1789 to 91. So this also acted as Constant Assembly. That is 89 to 91. Then comes Legislative Assembly, 1791 to 92. Then comes National Convention, 1792 to 95. Then comes Directory, 1795 to 99. Then comes So these are the different stages. Consulate under three consuls, but this consulate also did not continue for longer period, because by 1802 1803 Napoleon took control of all powers, and again that's what French Revolution during the French Revolution, a monarchy was replaced by dictator, so a military dictator, right? So let us see the course of French Revolution. See, especially France was going through financial crisis, right? And due to incapability of Louis XV, he failed to introduce any sort of economic reforms. But economic reforms were tried to be introduced by Louis XVI. So here, though Louis XVI was incompetent and weak, but he was not a bad ruler. Actually, he was not a bad. He was a honest monarch. So, though weak and incompetent, he was, at least to some extent, a honest monarch. So he became the new monarch, replacing Louis XV in 1774. So to address this financial crisis, he tried to bring some reforms. So initially, many of those reforms were suggested by Turgot and later were suggested by Necker. Okay, so what are those reforms? What are those reforms? Tax reforms, especially reducing taxations, reforming taxation, reducing unnecessary expenditures, and abolishing privileges. Abolishing so few privileges. So they suggested that reforming the existing taxes, abolishing few privileges, and reduction of unnecessary expenditures. So these were proposed by Turgot and Necker. But ultimately what happened? The nobles started to put pressure on king. So hence these reforms were dissolved. And in fact, Turgot was initially removed. Later Necker was also removed, right? So after the fall of Necker, so Necker was succeeded by many weak and incompetent financial ministers who were worthless actually. So ultimately, France is pushed into the period of bankruptcy. So where there was no alternative method was available. So there was no alternative method except imposing or proposing new taxes. So here, so there was no alternative. Just to increase the finances, they need to impose new taxes. So they decided to propose, or they decided to impose new taxes. They decided to impose new taxes. Imposing new taxes means what? Imposing new taxes means this tax burden will be on whom? So they decided to impose new taxes. So for that, they decided to convene Estates General. So Estates General is the body. Estates General is the body consisting of what? Body consisting of what? 3 estates. What, commoners? Body consisting of 3 estates. So together it was called as Estates General. Estates General is like a parliament, let us say, in general terms. Estates General is like a parliament. So who can impose taxes? Only this parliament, that is Estates General, can impose taxes. Obviously, all the executive powers were in the hands of king, but the taxes needs to be imposed through parliament. So this parliament called Estates General consists of first estate, it is the only body that can impose new taxes. So now what happened? What will happen? Commoners will revolt, because obviously if these new taxes were introduced, again this tax burden will have to be borne by whom? Commoners. So these commoners already suffering from famines, starvation deaths, poverty, inequality, social inequality, right? So that's why this revolution have started, right? So the king convened that Estate General meeting will be summoned. So Estate General was summoned with under Yes, actually. So we'll come to that. So Necker was called back. And Necker was appointed as the finance minister again. So here, see, generally in this Estates General, so listen carefully here. These are three independent bodies, right? What are these three? First estate, second estate, and third estate. And these three independent bodies also vote independently. They also vote independently. And generally, decision taken, let us say majority. Decision taken, majority. Either all the three estates will be on one side or at least two. At least two. And out of these three, two are privileged and one is unprivileged. You got it? So they used to vote independently, and the vote count is not taken as a whole but taken as a chambers, taken as estates. Not understand. For suppose, let us say combined strength of members of three estates, let us say 300. Generally, what do we take? Majority of this, but it is not considered actually. It is not considered. So first estate will have its own strength, second estate will have its own strength, third estate will have its own strength, right? So population wise, third estate is the larger population wise, but this third estate did not had as much as representation as their population was. So you getting me? This third estate did not had as much as representation as their population was. Generally, taking population into consideration, whose strength should be more? Third estate, but their strength was as equal to that of first and second estate, right? So once voting was done, as I said, no, voting was also done independently. Independently means first estate, second estate, and third estate separately. And after that, decision will be taken these three into consideration, not as a count of members but as a count of body only. Exactly. First decision will be voted in each body. Let us say, let us take example that, see here, favorable or unfavorable, let us say. Okay. So in first, let us say first estate, so a proposal was made. Let us say an example, just normal example. A proposal was made. So all these estates will discuss this proposal in their own estates, right? So let us say first estate have discussed this proposal and favor this. Second estate also discussed and voted in favor of that, and third estate rejected. Third estate discussed and voted against this. Let us individually. Now, how the decision will be taken? Taking these three into consideration. That means it becomes 2:1. 2:1. So it will be defeated. Are you getting me? So in that way, the estate count was taken into consideration. Decisions were implemented. So, but now once this parliament was, so when this estate general was summoned, that is going to happen. So what are the here now taking into consideration? Let us take their they have decided to impose or introduce new taxes. They decided to introduce new taxes to improve finances, right? So generally, let us take into consideration same example. So first estates, let us say, as an example, let us say first estate have accepted for this new taxes. Second estate will also accept, because they don't have to feel the burden, no, because they don't have to pay. Generally, third estate have to pay. So obviously it will vote against the new taxes. But still, can the third estate voice get noticed? No, because they will be defeated 2:1. You get me? So that's why when this Louis XVI summoned Estates General, the people means people of what? Third estate, they started raising their voice. They started raising their voice. So with the support of Necker, in fact, they got the support from Necker here. And Necker have allowed them to have strength equal to first and second estate. Necker allowed third estate to have strength equal to the combined strength of first. So that means if first estate have 100, second estate have 100, now combined strength, the strength of third estate will be 200. You got it? So Necker have allowed the third estate to have the combined strength of first and second estate, right? So now this third estate also demanded that the decision should be taken through voting in the Estates General as a whole, not independently. Are you getting? So earlier, this will vote independently, this will vote independently, this will vote independently. Finally, it will be taken as a body as a whole, by taking into consideration each vote. But now they demanded that the voting should be done as a whole. The voting should be done as a whole. That means obviously, let us say now this will have a strength of 200. Let us say combined strength of 200 versus 200. So whoever will vote more, the decision will prevail. So that was the demand of the third estate. So was it accepted by the king? It was not accepted by king. So due to this, the revolution has started. The revolution has started. So especially the third estate, which was dominated by whom? The middle class, the intelligent or educated intellectual class. So they have raised their voice against the king. And what they did, they raised their voice and met separately. They met separately. So separately means they met separately. Who met separately? The third estate. You're not understanding. You didn't get the point, right? So we have first estate, second estate, and third estate, right? Now this third estate demanded what? That the voting should be done in the Estates General as a whole. And that demand was not accepted by king. So now this third estate got separated from Estates General. Third estate got separated from Estates General and declared that it is the one who is representing entire France. This is the first instance of revolution. So, and it separated from Estates General and it met separately. It met separately as what? As National Assembly in July 1789. And this is this broke the French Revolution, right? So this third estate became now National Assembly, and National Assembly declared that they are the actual representatives of France, entire France, because it consists of population of different backgrounds, right? Population of different backgrounds. Once again. Okay, so it separately met as a separate body called National Assembly, and generally, immediately, will the king accept this? King did not accept it. So king denied. Generally, a States General meeting will be held in Royal Palace at Versailles. So generally, a States General meeting will be held in Royal Palace. So king immediately denied the entry of Royal Palace to this National Assembly. So this National Assembly met at nearby tennis court. Met in nearby tennis court in Versailles only, because Royal Palace was closed for them. So, and they took an oath here that was called as, famously called as, tennis court oath. What is this? What was this oath? This oath was that this National Assembly should not be dissolved until constitutional reforms were introduced. Got it? That means the members of this third estate, which now became National Assembly, have taken oath that they will not get separated. That means they will continue to remain united till constitutional reforms were introduced. So took an oath to remain united till constitutional reforms were introduced. That means they are demanding for constitutional reforms, especially against absolute monarchy, right? So immediately king rejected this, and he started to mobilize troops. He started to mobilize troops. But in fact, some of during this time, some of the nobles have supported the cause of the third estate, especially Mirabeau. Mirabeau, who belongs to the privileged class only, but supported the cause of commoners, the third estate. So, but how? So though king rejected this, the commoners, that is third estate, did not submitted themselves to the king. So finally, king accepted that and asked the clergy and nobility to join this third estate, which now became the National Assembly, right? But somehow the troops, the king continued to demobilize this third estate, that is National Assembly. So especially that resulted in a conflict between the royal troops and National Assembly in Paris. So in fact, this is the first victory for the National Assembly, where the National Assembly troops have defeated the royal troops and captured Paris and destroyed The Bastille prison. So Bastille prison was considered to be the symbol of tyranny. Symbol of tyranny, that is symbol of unlimited monarchical powers. As I already mentioned now, that every voice who rose against the king was imprisoned. So that's why Bastille prison was one of the brutal prison under them, which was considered as the symbol of tyranny. So this prison was demolished by the Paris mob. The Paris mob, who also took control of the Paris. And immediately in Paris, they set up their own government. Their own. So this was the first government set up by National Assembly, that is, or revolutionaries. So a municipal government was set up in France, and as well as they also set up a force called National Guard, right? So this was the first victory of National Assembly against royal king. So, or the first victory of the revolutionaries during French Revolution. So gradually, these kind of municipal governments were set up in many other cities in France. So similar and National Guards were set up in many other places. Right? So now, as I mentioned, so now this National Assembly also acted as what? Constant Assembly, right? So that is Constant Assembly 1789 to 91. So that means same, this National Assembly acted as Constant Assembly to bring what? Constitutional reforms. Bring constitutional reforms. So finally, and constitutional reforms were introduced, and for the first time, Declaration of Rights of Men was declared, where all men are equal and free. Right? So constitutional reforms were introduced and rights were declared. So this was the first time the rights were declared for the people in Europe, right? So not talking about world. World means already America has done already, right? I'm talking about Europe. So in these constitutional reforms, they have created three bodies. So that is executive, legislative, and judiciary. Okay, so it was a three body, that is executive, legislative, and judiciary. So especially, so talking about main reform, that is earlier what monarchy? Absolute monarchy was replaced by constitutional monarchy. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल मोनार्की और रिपब्लिकन मोनार्की नहीं होता ना. अगर रिपब्लिक हो तो मोनार्की नहीं होगा. रिपब्लिक इज ऑपोजिट टू मोनार्की. हाउ कैन दे बोथ एग्जिस्ट टुगेदर? रिपब्लिक मींस head of the state is elected. Monarchy means head of the state is not elected, selected or hereditary. So you can have absolute monarchy, or you can have constitutional monarchy, or you can have republic. Okay. Now, absolute monarchy was replaced by constitutional monarchy. That means still the king was the head of executive, but his functions are unlimited or limited? Limited, because now there is a body created that was called legislative body, which has legislative assembly, which will pass various legislations. And for judiciary, they created a body called judiciary, where judges were elected. Judges were elected, right? So, in this way, the reforms were introduced for the first time in France. So, under National Assembly, right? So, this established what? Legislative Assembly, 1791 to 92, right? So, especially this new body was created. But however, it has some new problems as well. So what are those new problems? What are those new problems? Huh? Okay, no great leadership, right? Very good. See, basically, this National Assembly was filled by members who are inexperienced, because they have no earlier political experience, right? And many of these members were influenced by extreme and radical views. They were inexperienced and influenced by extreme and radical views. Especially, these radical views were promoted and propagated by whom? Important clubs were there, no? Jacobin Club and another organization, that is Cordelier Club, especially under the leaders like Robespierre and Danton, right? So that's why, especially the period of legislative assembly was not a great period under France, because the members who formed for the first time, entered into this house called legislative assembly for the first time, were ineffective, inexperienced, and as well as they were greatly influenced by revolutionaries with the radical and extreme ideas which were propagated by Jacobin Club and Cordelier Club under the influence of Robespierre, mostly Robespierre, right? So we'll see Robespierre's role later. Right? See, generally, earlier this legislative assembly was dominated by Girondists. See, actually, there were few political parties like which were formed: Girondists, Republicans, Thermidorians, and Jacobins, Cordeliers, right? So different organizations actually. So earlier, this was National Assembly was led by Girondists, right? So, and during this time, listen carefully. So now is also the period where French war with Europe has started. French war with Europe has started. So what is this French war with Europe? Especially, many nobles who faced persecution, during the time of revolution have migrated to Austria. You got it? many nobles who were whose life was threatened during the time of French Revolution have migrated to Austria and took shelter under the Austrian king Leopold. Took shelter under Austrian king Leopold. So, and these nobles with Leopold wanted to restore old regime back in France. They wanted to restore old regimes, again bring back absolute monarchy, again bring back the power into the hands of Louis XVI. So, and this legislative assembly also believes that Louis XVI was also sympathized with these nobles. Also sympathized with these nobles. So, and during this time, Leopold have declared in 1791, he have declared a declaration called Declaration of Pillins. Declaration of Pillins. So what is this declaration? This declaration is nothing but that he will carry an armored campaign against France to restore the old regime. So, he will carry this armored campaign along with Prussia. So now it was France versus Austria and Prussia, right? So what is this Declaration of Pillins? Declaration of Pillins is an armed intervention, that they will intervene with force. Armed intervention in France. So immediately the Legislative Assembly under Girondists, so they started putting pressure on whom? Louis XVI. So Girondists pressurized Louis XVI to declare war on Austria. So Girondists, the Legislative Assembly put pressure on the Louis XVI to declare war on Austria. So that started a war between France and Austria. So initially this war disastrous for France. This war was disastrous for France. Especially during this time, some of the radicals who are part of Legislative Assembly believed that Louis XVI is secretly supporting Austria. Because Austria is fighting for what? To restore his position only. So radicals believed that Louis XVI was secretly supporting Austria. So that's why war is going to be disastrous for France. So now what they have to do? Now they wanted to bring again reforms. So these, under the pressure of these radicals, they decided to suspend Legislative Assembly and wanted to form national convention, or simply saying they decided to suspend Legislative Assembly and called for constitutional reforms again. They called for constitutional reforms again, and these constitutional reforms were introduced, and that formed what? This Legislative Assembly was replaced by a national convention in 1792, right? So this national convention created, removed what? Removed monarchy. And once the monarchy was removed means France was declared as republic. Right? So legislative assembly was dissolved, constitutional reforms were introduced, national convention was formed, and monarchy was removed and replaced by, and French became republic, right? And so along with this, the bicameral legislature was created. So national convention and bicameral legislature, right? So this this started the period of national convention. So that is from 1792 to 95, right? So this national convention was dominated by radicals, and especially dominated by Jacobins under the leadership of Robespierre. So the war was over. War was continued by national convention, and later it was over. And now these Jacobins have started massacres. As we already discussed earlier once, that under Jacobins, massacres were started, right? So especially these massacres were started in September 1792. So these massacres were called as September massacres. Whom they massacred? They massacred anyone who rose their voice against France. So that's why, especially they massacred through use of guillotine. So they in fact also executed Louis XVI as well through guillotine. So that's why this period is called as reign of terror, right? So especially it was carried by Robespierre and Danton. Later, even Danton was also executed by Robespierre. So it was one of the darkest period of French Revolution. In fact, as I already discussed earlier, so this in fact acted as a dark mark, a darkest period or a black mark on the French Revolution. So that's why many European countries came together to restore or bring back absolute monarchies only, right? So finally, after the fall of Robespierre only, then in fact during this time only, because of these assassinations and executions, so entire Europe, because entire other rest of the Europe was under what? Monarchies only. Only French was republic now. So rest of the Europe united versus France, and this Europe, that is especially under the leadership of Austria, Prussia, Sardinia, and England, Holland, right? So especially Austria, Prussia, England, Holland, and Sardinia, etc., formed into an alliance, and this alliance is called as first coalition. So there were many coalitions formed. So this was the first coalition against France. That is to restore the old regime or to bring back the old regime in France. Okay, so finally, so that was the case. So finally, this national convention, so especially after the fall of Robespierre, so national convention was taken over by Girondists, and Girondists brought constitutional reforms again, and this national convention was replaced by Directory. So Directory continued from 1795 to 99. So that was the beginning of a new change, right? So in this way, the French Revolution continued to reform itself, right? So just give me 2 minutes. Okay, so they decided to bring constitutional reforms under national convention. So here, constitutional reforms were introduced, right? So finally, in 1795, October 1795, National Convention was dissolved and created a new body called Directory. New body called Directory, right? And So this directory, that is in this directory, the executive powers were entrusted to not a single person but 5 directors. It's not to single person, it was executed, the entrusted to 5 powers. Whereas for the legislative powers were given to bicameral legislature, that is 2 councils were created. One is Council of Ancient and other is Council of 500, right? 100. Council of 500 members. Council of Ancient and Council of 500, right? And one provision that they also introduced in this new constitution was the 2/3 members of legislature, 2/3 members of the legislature should be taken from the members of National Convention. That 2/3 of the members of two-thirds of members of this new legislature should be taken from National Convention. But actually, this proposal was opposed by some of the royalists and bourgeois. And these royalists and bourgeois who revolted, who rose their voice against this proposal, have decided to carry an armed insurgency against this directory. So now this directory needs to protect itself. So the task of protecting the directory was entrusted to the military general Napoleon Bonaparte. The military general to or under directory. So what was his task? His task was to defend directory against Parisian mob, right? So that is the beginning of Napoleon Bonaparte, right? So now taking the directory period, that is from 1795 to 99. So in fact, this is the one of the worst periods of France again, because they were facing huge financial crisis, and there was corruption, right? And there was internal conflicts among the directors. So what will happen? So finally, in 1799, Napoleon overthrown directory and replaced it with consulate. Especially consulate continued from 1799 to 1804. Right? So in this consulate, there would be three consuls. So I'll write in fresh page. So under consulate, so there would be three consuls. So first consul, second consul, and third consul. These three consuls were to be elected by Senate for a period of 10 years. These consuls to be elected by the Senate so there will be another body called Senate. So for a period of 10 years. So all major powers will be in the hands of first consul, whereas second consul and third consul will only have a consultative voice only, right? That means declaring wars, making peace, or appointing ambassadors, or making diplomatic decisions, taking diplomatic decisions, all were in the hands of first consul. Right? So along with this consul, there will be, so this consul will be appointed by Senate, and apart from the Senate, there are also different for legislative functions, different councils were created. So like Council of State, and Triple H, right? So these are the bodies created under. So finally, it was again, it continued to exist only till 1804, where in 1804 he declared himself as the sole dictator by removing other two consuls. So there again, the French went into the hands of a military dictatorship from absolute monarchy. So that's why, particularly from 1804, from 1719 only, it was the rule of whom? Napoleon Bonaparte. So French Revolution ended. So from this time period, we'll see Napoleonic Wars, because coalition was formed against France. So now France will fight against that coalition under the leadership of Napoleon. So those are called as Napoleonic Wars. And those Napoleonic Wars continued till 1813. In 1813, Napoleon was finally defeated in Battle of Leipzig. And later again in 1815 in the Battle of Waterloo, which put an end to Napoleon. Clear? So this is the French Revolution. Too many pages, no? Understood? What you understood? Understood, online students? Right? So shall we see it again? So French Revolution started from 1789. So it's a social and political movement that erupted in France in 1789 June. So which had an impact on both France and Europe especially, and rest of the world in general as well. So it is due to various social, economic, and political factors that are responsible for French Revolution. So in fact, the conditions which provided favorable situation for the revolution to occur. Okay, it was copied actually. Right. So looking at the France conditions, France was under absolute monarchy. So in France, there was domination of aristocracy, that is the nobility and the clergy were the privileged class, and the common people were the unprivileged class. Taxes were paid by the unprivileged class, where the privileged class were exempted from payment of taxation. So church was the dominant institution, So, and poor economic conditions, and this is also the period of with the rise of middle class. Coming to the causes of French Revolution, so like evils of absolute monarchy. So that means government was highly centralized, and all the functions were concentrated in one hand, that is monarchy. Here, the current monarchies like Louis XV and later Louis XVI were weak and incompetent, who failed to correct the situation in France, and the government was corrupt and arbitrary. So aristocracy was uncontrolled, who enjoyed all the privileges, right? And coming to Louis XVI, he was weak and incompetent, so he failed to control the aristocracy, and he also failed to bring economic reforms, because though economic reforms were suggested by Turgot and Necker, but these were dissolved later under the pressure of aristocracy, right? Coming to the social conditions, the most of the population was agriculture dependent, so that is peasants and labor class. But however, in the last few years, the agricultural conditions was very poor because of monsoon failure, crop failures led to poor harvest and brought famine conditions. So this resulted in hunger, poverty, and starvation deaths, and as well as it also resulted in rise of inflation and unemployment rates. Right. So coming to the nature of society of France. So French society consists of three estates: first estate, second estate, and third estate. First estate is the clergy, second is the nobility, and third is the commoners. So these two were exempted from taxes and enjoyed privileges, but this was unprivileged, who had to pay taxes. And as well as the French Revolution was also influenced by ideas of Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau, who promoted the ideas like equality, social and economic equality, freedom, republic, democracy, and as well as liberty, equality, and fraternity. Especially these three became important ideals of French Revolution. Next, French is going through a financial and debt crisis, especially due to 7 Years' War, failure of agriculture, poor harvest, and failure of economic reforms under Louis XVI. And the tax oppressiveness, that means the underprivileged or unprivileged class has to bear the burden of taxes. And failure of economic reforms, as I mentioned, Louis XVI failed to pass the reforms suggested by Turgot and Necker. Food scarcity, people are suffering from food crisis, so where especially bread rights and great fear have began. So course of French Revolution. So this is the series of events. So starting with due to the financial crisis, so French finance ministers Turgot and Necker suggested reforms. So to implement these reforms or propose new taxes, the king convened for Paris Parliament, that is Estates General. So during that time, the third estate demanded that the voting should be taken. The voting should be considered as a Estate General as a whole, which was denied by the Louis XVI. So due to this third estate got separated from Estate General and met separately as National Assembly in Versailles. So when king denied the royal palace, the entry of royal palace to them, so they have met at nearby tennis court and they have taken oath. That was called as tennis court oath. What was that oath? That they remain united till constitutional reforms were passed, and they remain united and continued as National Assembly. So, and ultimately this resulted in conflict between king's troops and the troops and National Assembly forces. So, which the National Assembly have defeated the royal troops and conquered or captured Paris. So, this called as fall of Paris, especially the fall of Bastille prison, which was demolished because it is considered as a symbol of tyranny. And they also formed municipal government and national guard. So within a short span, within a few months, such kind of municipal governments and national guards were formed in other cities as well. So this National Assembly now continued as Constant Assembly with the task of bringing constitutional reforms. So finally, and it also for the first time, it declared the Declaration of Rights of Man, and constitutional reforms were introduced. So under this, these three, that is legislative, executive, and judiciary, were created, where this absolute monarchy was replaced by constitutional monarchy. So next, legislative assembly. So
this constitution absolute was replaced by constitutional monarchy.
So legislative assembly. So legislative assembly, this was dominated by Girondists, and the members of this legislative assembly was inexperienced and greatly influenced by the extreme and radical ideologies, especially promoted by Robespierre and Dender. So during this time, French war with Europe has started, because many nobles who escaped to Austria took shelter under Leopold, and with the help of Leopold, they decided to bring back the old regime. So Leopold finally declared in 1791, he declared Declaration of Polonaise. That means he decided to carry an armed intervention in France with the support of Prussia. So with this, Girondists pressurized Leo XVI to declare war on Austria, and that started France war with rest of the Europe. And initially this war was disastrous, and they suspected that Louis XVI was supporting Austria. So they, especially under the pressure of radicals, this legislative assembly was dissolved and constitutional reforms were introduced, which created National Convention, and this constitutional monarchy was completely removed, and French was declared as Republic, right? And now this National Convention, that is from 1792 to 95, went into the hands of radicals, that is under Jacobin Club led by Robespierre. So this period was a dark period for the France because of their massacres, so where they have killed many people through guillotine, including the king itself, that is Louis XVI, right? So that's why this period of France is considered as reign of terror, right? So finally, due to these atrocities, the rest of the Europe formed a coalition against France under the leadership of Austria. So that was called as First Coalition against France. And finally, after the fall of Robespierre, so Girondists again took control of this and introduced constitutional reforms in 1795. Under these constitutional reforms, a directory was created where executive powers were entrusted to 5 directors, along with legislative powers under 2 bodies, that is bicameral legislature, that is Council of Ancient and Council of 500. But one condition that 2/3 of the members of these legislatures would be drawn from the previous National Convention. But this was opposed by the middle class, and middle class decided to overthrow this National Convention, this directory. So that's why this directory appointed the military general Napoleon Bonaparte to defend directory against this Parisian mob. So, but however, this period of 4 years of directory was a period of financial crisis, huge economic crisis, corruption, inefficient administration, and most importantly, internal conflicts among these directors. So finally, in 1799, Napoleon have overthrown this directory and replaced this directory with consulate. So this consulate consisting of 3 consuls, which were elected by Senate for a period of 10 years. So all the powers, or all major powers, were in the hands of first consul, where second and third consul will have only consultative voice. So, and along with this, the legislative bodies were also created, such as Council of State, legislative body, and tribunate. And finally, the other 2 consuls were removed by the first consul, that is Napoleon Bonaparte, in 1804. So which replaced again this consulate with a single ruler, that is consul. That's called, there's nothing but a military dictatorship, right? So this is French Revolution. Clear? So we'll continue tomorrow. Hmm? Rejected? Because of administrative difficulties, sharing of resources, and as well as population issues. Cabinet mission is not in favor. No, they did not separate it. No, partition is different. No, they only provided provincial autonomy. So in that, the grouping system have been introduced. But partition kaha tha? Partition nahi tha na? So they were against partition only. So if the statement is saying that cabinet mission is in favor of partition, that's wrong. Trade Disputes Act is actually, the name itself says, known as to resolve the trade disputes. Okay? So for that purpose, they have suggested formation of a consultative board and inquiry board. So that means trade purpose, trade dispute, मतलब factory में कोई dispute था between management and workers. So उस disputes को resolve करने के लिए तो दो boards होगा, एक inquiry board होगा और consultative board होगा. So that means these disputes will be resolved by these two boards. So under this act, these two boards are compulsory to be set up to resolve disputes through mediation, okay? Through conciliation and mediation. Chitra Act and Madhubani, Bihar. You are asking both are same? No, it's not. No. See, generally both are miniature arts only, but they're different. Well, styles will be different. Right. Thank you.